concept, the LCMS did, that churches would pool their dollars internally and borrow from ourselves. We're our own. The LCMS in the nation is one entity, so we all share the same 501c3. The IRS sees us as one entity with various pockets. So that's why you still have to have voters meetings and things like that, and your district has to have voters meetings, which is district conventions, and then we come together as a national organization every 3 years by our bylaws. All of that's technically IRS for government reasons. But because we're one entity, we can pass our dollars around internally. And since we invented this years ago, it's now regulated by the government. Church extension funds is an actual legal term, a CEF. And it's pretty neat because we inspired it, so a lot of denominations have them. We are just far and above the largest. Like all of the others combined aren't even as big as us. That also means we have the most scrutiny, and that's why sometimes we get frustrated because my company is very slow in loan processing and very, we're still paper-based, and it's because we have zero marks on our record, and CEF's the regulation. We're not FDIC insured, but we've never lost a dollar, and we don't foreclose on churches. So my department, though, is not in the direct banking. I do financial planning, but not on the banking side. I do it on the ministry side of things. My main role is to help congregations do everything from long-term strategic planning to how do we build something. So I take them through the whole process from concept, ministry plans, building plans, how do we pay for it, and then capital campaigns. Some of you remember when you did our last capital campaign. There was a guy that ran that campaign with you, and his name was Carl Gaelic. So I technically have Carl Gaelic's old job. Now his job wasn't like mine was. Mine's evolved into something bigger than it was in his day, but that's really the position that I hold, Vice President, Ministry Support, Ministry Solutions. There's 3 of me, and I don't actually cover Florida anymore. So his name's Tom Egebrecht. He's actually met with some of your church leaders. Tom Egebrecht, I hired him and trained him, so we'll see if he does good. But he's been talking to y'all about some stuff, so hopefully you guys can do that. Come on in. Oh, Miss Bonomi. So anyway, that's why I know about the church, because I'm flying everywhere, and I'm meeting with church councils, and throughout COVID, we were doing a lot of what do we do situations. And I mean, the first thing to know is that you guys were ahead of the curve because you already were doing online worship. I'm sure you recognize that, but all of our churches scrambled immediately, like, what are we going to do? And originally, believe it or not, there were theological concerns to online worship. Now, this has been an issue across the church since our founding. How far away can someone be from the pulpit for the pulpit to be effective? I mean, literally, it's been an issue. And it actually came to a head when we had a Lutheran on the space station years ago. Where there's been a bunch of Lutheran LCMS astronauts over the years. And we actually, outside of Houston, one of our largest congregations is right outside the gates of Houston's, what's it called? Thank you, Johnson Space Center, right, Gloria Day in Houston. Anyway, so they're trying to figure it out. So how does it work? How do we give communion to a guy in heaven, right? So that was just a fun debate that we had in seminary. But anyway, when online came about, most people were like, fine, it's a pandemic, let's set up online worship. And so, you can picture this, Tim Hartner, I love him, but I want you to picture Tim Hartner if he didn't have all this stuff, and there was no such thing as Jeremy Becker. Yeah. And the pandemic hits. And Tim Hartner trying to, with a smartphone that he can't, try to balance it in the pulpit. And then, is this thing on? Anyway, so that's what was happening around the country. It was all the Tim Hartners were wigging out. So different entities in the church stepped up to kind of help. But what it's really done now that we're, over a year into this is churches have started to realize the benefit of online worship. And you guys, you know this, but it's good to hear it again, that when people are away from you all physically, it's important that they worship with you. Now, yeah, they can visit other churches when they're on vacation. That's certainly something people like to do, but there's something about obviously worshiping with friends. I mean, I still worship with you all. Now, I worship with other churches. I don't have my own parish in New York. I'm part of a church plant that's going through a transition. But even when I go to my church plant, I often watch your worship service. Some of it's to judge Henzi and some of the things he does. He's a young pastor. He's just figuring things out. It's okay. But in reality, what's happening is that churches are realizing that the connection to their people can be extended to vacations, right? That's a big one. Now, the excuse of when you go on vacation, like my sister, you don't go to church. I mean, I'm really testing it. Don't tell her I'm keep mentioning her all these things, because I want to see if she's watching. So I'll have to say, I won't say something that dramatic at late service, but if you didn't hear, she's at Disney World right now. So just saying. But really, I mean, the idea of you don't go to church on vacation kind of goes away, because watching from your hotel room isn't a big deal. Like, in fact, it's probably pretty cool that you get to still connect with your people. And I'll come back to that in just a moment. The other thing is, of course, when people are in hospital. And, my father, when he was in the hospital, he still worshiped with you all on an iPad. And that was a big deal to him, that he could stay connected and, check up on people that were going to church. For our congregations that are in military areas, they are even more connecting with troops who are around the world. So as people deploy, especially if they're having, the back and forth deployment, not necessarily the year-long ones, they're still able to connect with their church at home. Now, yeah, there's chaplains and there's certainly worship services on our bases around the country, but again, there's still nothing like being connected to your home church. And I, of course, can speak. I haven't lived here since 2000. I mean, the last time I actually lived here was my mom. I lived, when did I live? August of 2000 was the last time I lived here. And this is still, I call this my home church, even though, I mean, you get the idea. So anyway, all that's been kind of figured out. So now that we've got out of the trauma mode, how do we use online worship for the benefit of the kingdom in a more intimate, connected way? Now, you know this more than anything, that coming to church and seeing people is a huge part of Sunday morning. It's secondary, right? Primary is God's family gathering around Word and Sacrament and all that. Absolutely. But it's not, it's not on its own. It is designed to be surrounded in the setting of a family gathering, just like a meal. I'm going to eat meatballs today, and it's the most important thing of the day, besides worship, is I'm going to eat meatballs. But there's a setting around those meatballs where, my mom and my dad and whoever else wants to show up now that I've talked about meatballs for a while, and I'm eventually going to, yeah, exactly, see? And so anyway, so you understand that kind of setting thing. But so the connections that we have is very important on Sunday mornings, and you all know this. Now, not every church obviously operates this way. There's certain more churches that operate like Catholic churches do, but let's be honest, sometimes Catholic churches are just in and outs, check the boxes. And that's something the Catholic Church has been fighting against for years, but it's inherent to our denomination that coming together as family and worshiping is part of it's theological for us. It's not just a fun thing that we do. So how do you translate that familial relationship to online worship? So this has been the huge conversation in our churches. So as I do ministry planning or strategic planning with churches, this is usually one of the main points right now over the last few months. And so various ideas have come out. I'd say the most important one, and something that that I know your pastor has seen, because I did a little video on it. He gets videos from me every week. The whole country does, but anyway, he has to watch them because I check with my mother to make sure that he does. And we're bringing this up over the next few weeks, is how do you connect online with people? So one of the ways to do it is having a little studio, which you could build somewhere here, and you have an online host that actually greets people online. Now, if you do Zoom, now a lot of our churches just do Zoom for worship because they're smaller churches. And so you can literally talk to the people online. Now, in your case, there's people typing into the comments and stuff. If you haven't worshiped online before, paid attention, you can type comments. Well, 5 minutes before service or 10 minutes before service, the online host is interacting with those people. And while you guys are interacting here, they're interacting in the same way, so that you have that fun little greeting before service. In the most extreme example, that person is bringing those connections into the actual physical service. And so, the pastor is told, hey, say hi to the Johnson family. They're here today, but they're on vacation. They just want you, so everybody waves to the camera. So, those kinds of interactions are connecting people that aren't here in person to people inside the sanctuary. Same thing with prayer requests. Same things with family announcements, so that if you two couldn't have been here, all of us still could have turned around to the camera and said, happy anniversary. That kind of stuff is important. And we know this because it's how we operate physically, but how do we do this using digital means? And there's this way to do it. One of the other ways, and again, this is a little bit more of a small church concept, but it could translate, and we just haven't figured out all the details yet, is showing the families that are online to the families that are physically present. Now, yeah, we could wrap the sanctuary in like digital screens, right? That's the extreme, but you always start with the extreme and then condense it to what you can handle. So that's exactly right. Or like folding laundry and stuff like that, right? Yeah. So, but Oh, oh, exactly, because you're looking around. I know. So, only one guy fell asleep this morning, but it's fine. When I peaked my volume, he snapped up. It was great. It was great. And it wasn't my dad. I was very proud of my father. Very proud of my father today. But one example for this is something like Jeremy knowing that somebody's on vacation, and so we literally figure out a way to live stream them in to the beginning of the announcements, or sometime maybe during the offering or a point in the service where we say hi to the Johnson family, and they sort of wave and say, "Hey everybody, we miss you. We're here at Disney World, and we'll see you next week." Now, it seems kind of cute and cheesy, but what's really happening there? In one sense, in that scenario, those kids are learning about their connection to their parish, and that this family is their family no matter what. So there's a big lesson in a parents inside of a hotel room sitting for worship and connecting with their home church, right? But moreover, it continues this expression of family gathered to strengthen whatever. And this, of course, goes to the sermon about kids today, which you'll get in a moment. I think everybody else was early service. All right, so that's kind of one of the big trends that we're seeing in online worship. The other one is understanding that in a lot of places, online worship communities are going to stay. Sometimes it's because people have connected to a parish and they moved away, and they're just going to continue to worship in their parish. This happens a lot of times in like mountain areas or rural areas where it's just a really large distance to their home church, or they've moved away into an area that doesn't have an LCMS church, and so yeah, they could go to another denomination, but they kind of want to choose to. Whose coffee is that? That's mine? Oh, nice. I was like, did Hensley leave coffee here for a whole week? Oh, where's that mug? I'm definitely going to do something to that. I've never met him. I've never met Pastor Hensley in person. I was in one Zoom meeting with him. I don't know.
He told me to tell you, he's like, one of these days you got to come when he's here.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, no, he's pretty good. He's pretty good. His stories, though, I mean, he's always got a good little story. So the Pope walks into a bar like that. It's always good. Anyway. Okay, so what was I talking about there? Sorry, I'm distracted. The other trend is yes. Oh, yeah. So remaining connected to your home church when you're spread out in the country. So the idea is, if we're always going to have this small group of people that are always going to be online, sometimes for health reasons, shut-ins, etc. And one little side note on that, for shut-ins, obviously most people can handle iPads nowadays and technologically advanced stuff, but there's still a pocket of Pastor Tim's that can't handle that stuff. So one day when Pastor Tim goes into a wonderful nursing home for old Kansans, helping him by getting him an iPad that has like one button to start worship is important, and it's worth the investment. In fact, you all should buy it for him and hand it to him and check on them regularly to make sure they're still watching worship. I mean, that's an active thing that we can do to keep people connected. But it's understanding we're going to have this online community, and so how do we help that community connect to one another? How do we have multiple things besides just this interactive Bible study? What does it look like to have interactive small groups that are going to be online for years to come? But instead of thinking of it as an adjunct to your current ministries, and understanding that there are people that are always going to be connected online, how do we embrace them and connect with them where they are physically? So that's important as well. The other things coming out of COVID are, of course, different uses of space. We certainly think about that in a lot of our larger congregations that have a ton of space. In our case here, it's probably, and this is with my church in Phoenix, how do we have better airflow? How do our places open up more? That's happening in a lot of our old sanctuaries with window issues and old HVAC system issues. And that's just a normal thing. Even if this pandemic goes away, we all of a sudden realize that we're all spitting in each other's mouths when we sing. Okay, well, we're going to get back to not having Mass one day, so how do we still have good ventilation and things like that? So important even for you guys as you think towards your future. And, there's also the regular trends in the church. I'm going to spend more time on youth and stuff in just a moment, but regular trends in the church to how do we connect people and then send them back out? What does that pattern look like? So our denomination originally we were a neighborhood church. We were founded in America by, just like most denominations in America, when we came over to this country, we were a denomination for Saxon Germans who spoke a very specific kind of German, who were a very specific kind of Lutheran that could be traced back to the Reformation. We didn't change. We were the same. We're the unaltered Augsburg Confession. That's UAB if you ever see it at the end of a name of a church. It's very specific. And we just gathered each other. But we also came to the same areas. So if you go to like Cincinnati, there's an area of Cincinnati that's now called Over the Rhine, where we had 3 German churches within 2 blocks of each other. There's various reasons for that. But they were right there because there were thousands of German immigrants from our area of Germany that just piled there. Now, I'm not German, but I'm saying our in the general sense, the LCMS. So it was easy because you went to church to be fed, strengthened, to socialize, all the other political stuff that you do, especially in small towns. And then you go back into the community. The actual service in the community happened by people. It just so happened they all went to the same church. So social ministry was inherent to the community, but everyone in the community went to the same church. So it was correlation, not causation. As we move forward in time and our churches get more diverse and our denomination very slowly opens its doors to other people, guess when we started speaking English in our denomination? When do you think we first changed our name to English? Nope, no, you'd think that. Well, that's when we changed our name officially, but no, 1919. Right around 1919, we went, we should probably stop speaking so much German. Yeah. So a lot of our first English Lutheran churches were founded right around 1919, 1920, 1921, because the mother church wanted to continue speaking German, and a group of people were like, we need to speak English now because, we're fighting Germany in a war. And so the English would break off, and they'd start First English, and then the original church would remain. Fun fact, my church in Orlando that I served, Trinity in Orlando, it was founded in 1919 as Trinity Lutheran Church. Right about the mid-20s, the battle finally was won to start speaking English, and so they changed the name to First English Lutheran Church. And when they built the big sanctuary there in Orlando, on the front, they etched, they embosses in, this way is called relief. Yeah, the relief that they built said First English Lutheran Church. Well, another voters meter happened, and they flipped the name and said, no, we're going back to Trinity. And so they had to shave the name off, and now it's embossed into the Trinity. But everything else is still relieved, so it's kind of funny. Anyway, when we opened up our doors, we still were doing the basic stuff. We had just expanded to Lutheran education because we didn't want our kids going to public schools and learning English and learning all that American stuff. So we created the Lutheran school system to keep our kids isolated and learning German and all that kind of stuff. That's 150 years ago. It evolves over time to where our schools started becoming founded because they're missional and they wanted the community kids to learn well because the public schools either didn't exist yet, because not every community adopted the national law even when it came about. So you fast forward a bunch of years, and our ministry was basically worship, Bible studies, Mary Berry, LWML, Lutheran Layman's League, which was just dudes hanging out. Let's just be honest. LWML did all the work. Lutheran Layman's League was the guys just hanging out. And then children's ministry. So it was Sunday school and our grade school. That was it. As communities evolved, and you get up into the 50s, the 60s, and the 70s, that's when social ministry really began in our denomination. Now, it happened in other places, like I said, but for our denomination, for it to really exist inside of our church, was different than the way it was set up because we were community churches. It wasn't that we as Lutherans weren't doing social ministry, like caring for people, feeding the poor, etc. It's just that it was a community action, not a church action, even though all of us were still part of the same church. Get the idea? See, it's right along each other. Well, then our churches adopted all the social ministries. There were various reasons why in the 70s, don't want to spend too much time on it, when that went away. And our denomination started shrinking from 70s through the 80s and 90s to where we reverted back to the way we used to be, which was isolationists. We do worship. We care for each other. We still do children's ministry. We still have the second largest school system in the country behind the Catholics. There's 2,000 schools in the nation and even more preschools. But our social ministries had kind of dwindled. And there's lots of reasons for that. And a lot of the reason, just say it this way, is that we were worried about ourselves. Maybe rightfully so. It's not necessarily sinful. Well, it's sinful to worry, but for us to focus on ourselves isn't a bad thing. The point of the church is to strengthen and encourage God's family so they go back out into the world and serve. It's just that we weren't facilitating the going out into the world. Okay? One of the massive latest trends in the church, especially coming out of COVID, is, because when we paused, I'm talking about the whole church, so not just you guys. When we paused, and all of us were locked down, and we looked at the ministries of our church, did anything really change? Because we're worshiping online, and we're having Bible studies online, but that's all our church ever did anyway. So what are we even doing? So as churches come out of COVID, not only did they check their clergy, which some of my brothers were called out for not doing much, even though it takes 2 days to write a sermon. No, it doesn't. Come on. But what are we doing with our property? What are we doing in our community? What are we doing? Not serving our neighbors so that they come to church, but serving our neighbors because it's what God's kids do. That's a very important distinction in the Lutheran church. That is not true for other denominations. Now, Catholics do it. They serve their neighbor because it's part of the system that they've set up to earn their way into heaven and out of purgatory. It's just the way it is. And evangelical denominations, it's so that they can, win you for Jesus, right? Okay? But the Lutheran church, and obviously I'm saying Christendom, the way the church is set up, and it's all over Scripture, is you serve your neighbor because it's what you do. And so if God has given you your life, now we're talking stewardship, so if God has given you things to steward, your life, your time, your talents, your treasures, all that stuff that we talk about, but literally everything you have, every moment, every relationship, every breath of air, and your collective stuff to steward, so your church property, he's given you this to steward as a family. Are we using it for what we should be using it for? Primarily, to gather around Word and Sacrament as his family. Check that box, yes. Secondarily, to fellowship and lift up our young people, like you've heard in the sermon before, and some of you will hear later. Absolutely. But also, how do we use this to serve? Now, it's a little different for you all, and you guys are serving in different ways here. Preschool is a great way to do that. You're loving families, you're caring for them, et cetera, et cetera. Some of our churches in the cities, that's where they really were shocked. When they finally realized, we're not doing anything. We do nothing. And none of our people even live downtown, so who's going to go check on our church? I mean, this is literally conversations that were happening. Like, someone's going to drive 30 minutes into town because even the pastor doesn't live there, if we even have a pastor. So what are we going to do with our property looking towards the future? So a lot of the work that I'm doing now with a lot of our inner city churches, even our suburban churches, is how do we reform our ministries and then match our facilities to facilitate our ministries. Facilities facilitate. If you have to work with me, you heard 5,000 times a day. If your facilities don't facilitate your ministries, then they're not facilities. They're just brick. So what changes can we make? Now, I'm coming around to you guys. What changes, as we look forward as a congregation, do we make to this physical property to match our ministries? Okay, you don't just make buildings and then figure out the ministry. It's what do our ministries look like? And if you heard me today, it should be continuing to be youth and stuff. And because I grew up in this community, I know there's a lot of stuff for kids to do. It's just not a lot of it's good unless you're enrolled in some actual sports and things like that my parents kept me in all the time because they knew I'd get in trouble, and I still did. They don't know everything yet. Someday I'll confess everything I did. But
I'm here for you, Nancy.
yes, yeah, they once in a while will slip too. It's great. So my mom was perfect. That's all I know. It's my dad. It's my dad was the bad one, right?
He's not here.
It's exactly. He's not here. Oh. Yeah, Billy Braths are famous for being really good kids. So what are you doing with this property long term? And I'm just going to be flat out. This place should be a massive youth center, period. End of story. Every kid that goes to elementary school should walk over here after school. Or, well, better, I don't like any kids, but the middle schoolers should walk down the park and they should be here afterwards. And Jeremy Becker should just have a blast with them. I mean, right? I mean, absolutely. Make this room more comfortable, more Bible study. It's supposed to be the youth room, just saying. We literally had a campaign. I actually gave a talk during the capital campaign, I found out. I now produce capital campaigns for churches. I spoke during the capital campaign about giving, because I was so happy about getting a youth room. That's why 2 of these tiles are youth tiles, and they're going to be flipped by the end of today. I'm just letting you know. We painted a few of these tiles back in the day. But understandably, this needs to be multi-use space for the ministries of this church. But as you move forward, how do you use this property to steward it for things like engaging youth, letting them see that being connected to God's family actually does work in society, right? Let me say it this way. The Baptist bubble doesn't work. My friends that were part of the Baptist church growing up, they were shocked out of that system when they went away to college or even when they went to high school. So bubbling your kids, which we used to do again, remember this was a big Lutheran thing. It's the reason why we had a Lutheran grade schools. We bubbled our kids and then tried to keep them in that bubble until they were called into heaven. Like, just live in your church. Go to church on Sundays, Sunday afternoons, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday for school. You have after-school youth group. On Saturdays, you do what your parents tell you to do. Then you go to church again on Sunday. I mean, that was the formula. You go to college, but you go to Lutheran college. And then from there, you become a Lutheran teacher. So you're teaching back at a Lutheran school. Or if you live in a little community, you're somehow directly connected to your church. And you just go, oh, be careful with the world. Fine. For some people, right. You're in the bubble. But obviously, it doesn't work, right? You're going to end up in the real world. And so how do we model this to our young people? That being connected here and interacting with the real world, but being strengthened in your faith, knowing that you're God's kids, knowing you're heaven bound, etc. That's what I do. I'm telling you, I got a bunch of churches that are investing millions and millions and millions of dollars in youth. And that they're making a wonderful place that they feel connected. I'm going to be honest with you. That sanctuary is wonderful, but that's an adult sanctuary. And that's okay. Kids need to grow up in there. I did. You would have known I was there because I would have dropped stuff all the time, and I would echo a lot more because there's no carpet in there, because I talked all the time in worship as a kid, unless I was sleeping. Sorry, Pastor Tim. But you need a place for young people to feel like, no, we care about you and we're investing in you. This is your place. So that's going to be your next thing, if I have any say in it, which I technically don't, but maybe I'll transfer my membership, so I do have a say in it. So this is, now I'm coming back around to really what is the really big trend in our church, is as we come back around, yes, there's more social ministries. Yes, our people are recognizing that our food banks need to come back, or we need to support other food banks, that we're allowed to partner with we're allowed to partner with other denominations. I know, I shouldn't have said that on camera, right? That you need to be involved in bold justice, that you need to support the Catholic Church down the street, in the Baptist Church, in the Methodist Church, and that pastors need to be friends with each other and support each other, especially in such a radical community like Weston, which I'm sorry, it is. This is not central Iowa. So, all that stuff is good, and I want you guys, supporting your churches in downtown, supporting your other schools, making sure that Holy Cross Lutheran Church should be the most beautiful Constantinople level place of ministry because of where it is, and because, raise your hand if you were connected to Holy Cross at some time in your life. Okay, so a few of us. Yeah, and if you didn't know, the founders of this church, most of them were from Holy Cross and Christ Lutheran in North Miami. And so caring for those churches, that they don't have the means that you guys do, but they're brothers and sisters, part of the same denomination, you share the same 501c3. Absolutely keep doing that work. You don't need to have a food bank here. You don't need to have some of the social ministries that your sister churches do. You get to support them, just as they support you in prayer and pride ministry too. But what you all have is a situation unlike a lot of other places. You have a culture in Weston where young people live a whole different life, even beyond me. I mean, you're 20 years removed, and these kids are living a whole different life than I did. And you guys, Jeremy, you can get into it more if you want to get more specific, but they're not connected to reality, So how does the church connect them to? How do you provide a place that connects them to reality? And the reality is that they're God's kids, and that they're, you get the idea there. So we have churches that are in various ways, but the biggest trend is that return to young people ministry. So building new Sunday school wings, expanding preschool ministries, because that's awesome. Preschool ministry is amazing across the board. Expanding their schools if they have schools. So one of the things about COVID, all of our Lutheran schools around the country are full. All of them. Because they're private, and they already had health stuff in place that were above public schools, and so they could open. In most states, our Lutheran schools could be open when public schools weren't. So parents sent their kids to the Lutheran school. Now, the Lord is in charge of everything, and he does this whole silver lining thing whenever he wants to. He makes good out of crap. It's the way it is, sorry. But it's actually a biblical word. Luther said it a lot. He said a lot of worse things too. Anyway. And so one of the things he's done is not just reinvigorated the church by us looking at ourselves and saying, what are we really doing? But also showing us that, you know what? There's a lot of kids in these hallways who have no idea who Jesus is, whose parents sent their kids here just because it was open. Okay, you're going to pay us to teach your kids about Jesus? Okay, cool. Well, if congregations aren't engaged in the school, then it's just some business that's sharing a property. If you all don't know the names of all of your teachers, memorize them. Nice enough to put their names actually in the hallway for you. If you've never met them before, maybe come one day during the week. At what time does school get out? At about 12:30, so come at about 12:45, so you miss the chaos. And meet the teachers. Pray for them. So in my ministry planning with churches, is another big thing that I'm doing is you bring the congregation and how do you serve and connect with the school families, and how do you serve and connect with your faculty, since they are your frontline ministers of the gospel. And one of my favorite ones is they'll form these ministry teams that will adopt classrooms. So many of you room moms or room dads back in the day? My mom's going to raise her hand. You know about them though, right? So I realized my parents were room parents because I was a bad kid. They wanted to keep track of me. Whatever. It worked out. Again, I'm still alive. All my fingers and toes. So, but how do you adopt classrooms? What does it look like for you to every Monday or every Sunday after worship, you slide some prayer cards underneath the doors, or maybe you slide a Starbucks gift card under the door and say, hey, we're thinking about you. Thanks for teaching these kids about Jesus. I mean, all of you can do that, right? Absolutely. And you meet them, and then maybe you come once in a while. And so the other thing is that they'll form these little ministry teams that help and pick up and drop off, because the chaos of dropping little kids off is pretty crazy. And so, yeah, they get FBI background check. They become a little security team. They get coffee on a Monday morning, and they greet the young kids. And the kids get to know them. Oh, Mr. Johnson, yeah, nice to meet you, et cetera, all that kind of stuff. Supporting your school ministry. Why? Because their parents pay this institution, to teach their kids about Jesus. You get to be a part of that if you can. In our larger, of course, schools and stuff, it's people literally taking off days of work to volunteer in the schools during the day, getting FBI background checked and all that stuff, but doing that work appropriately. So, kind of a little brief summary, and then we can do some questions, or Jeremy can fill in a few of the gaps, is, this online worshiping community is not going away. How do we embrace that, and how do we connect people when they're away and change the culture from, if I'm out of town, I don't have to go to church. No, stay connected. Stay connected to your community, because it's what God's called you to do, and it's how you get fed. And the second thing is this big connection to youth and embracing them and raising them and lifting them up in various ways, from facilities to ministries to caring for faculty and staff and expanding schools across the country. Okay, Jeremy, what I miss?
Good stuff. I think one of the things that, as I hear you talk, we embraced live streaming 2015 when we moved into the sanctuary. And while our technology has greatly improved in the last year, because it needed to be better than it was, and COVID forced us to be better than it was, we already had a culture of this is available online if you're not here, which I think is awesome. I think I hear congregations going, oh, we're back in person now, we're going to stop live streaming. I'm like, oh, no, you put all the infrastructure together to connect with people and you're going to miss out on an opportunity. But they're so afraid of not having people in person. And it doesn't replace the in-person. You can't. We're a community of people. We are built that way. But it does still provide a great ministry connection for people. And so I like that challenge that you gave us. We actually did have one family move away. We weren't able to do confirmation last year in the spring, so we did it in the fall once we started worshiping again in person. But there was one family that moved away in the summer from the confirmation class, and so we were able to have them on the screens from their living room in Texas be a part of confirmation, right of confirmation. So we have that technology. We can bring you in from your vacation to do a testimonial of how you're serving as a family even on a vacation. I mean, when we start going back to Haiti, I really hope that we can have a live group from Haiti on our screens next time we do that, so that the connection can happen and those things are there. So I'm excited for all that and how that plays out. And like you said, we don't have the day school. Like I know some of my friends who are teachers in other parts of the country, and where schools are still not open in some places. The Lutheran schools have been and decided they were going to be from day one in August. And they did, to bring in a lot of new people. One of the things I'm seeing here is that we doubled our attendance in the last 2 times of our middle schoolers on Friday nights, because it's a place where they can come and hang out in person. And so, we had 18 kids here Friday coming to play games and their parents, and I would say probably half that group, maybe a third of that group are not members here, but they either went to preschool here and helped out with VBS still, and now they're connecting again, and their parents just hung out and talked because they needed a place on Friday night, and they're not getting that in person. And so it's exciting to see just the real small things that we're not reinventing the wheel, we're just embracing the need that's there and recognizing it. So that's kind of exciting to see all that. So it's also great to hear your perspective from a more global sense of how things are going, because you see a lot of that. I know you're traveling like at least every other day, if not more. So it's
Vegas tomorrow.
Yeah.
And that's actually a good story too. It's another school. Their school closed, and another school moved in, and it's a Christian school, and the Lutheran Church adopted it. This is First Good Shepherd in downtown Las Vegas, and they're busting at the seams. They're full, and the pastor is the pastor of the school, and nobody knows it's not a Lutheran school. It's just their school, and they want kids to learn about Jesus and embracing the families. And actually, the parent thing's a good example too. That we have churches that have figured out we got to have these kind of lounge areas for parents and stuff. Just have them hold on for a few minutes longer. Here at the preschool too, how do we keep them around for just a few minutes longer? How do they meet Jeremy and meet Pastor Henze and meet some of these teachers, and then one day, when they do have that family crisis, when they do get that tug from grandma on the back of their head, this is their church, this is their community, and they start to know you guys. They're introduced, and we're always doing the long play. I mean, we're doing the long play on you all, until you get to heaven. We're still working on y'all, right? And still working on me. But we have to see it that way. And you guys are spoiled, right, with your weather and stuff down here. You're spoiled with your property too. I could tell you horror stories of churches around the country, but again, how do we use what God's given to us appropriately in ministry and in long-term stuff? You prompted something else in my head. I don't remember what it was now. Anyway, then I go to Dallas the next day. I'm there for 2 whole days, though. I get to unpack my luggage if I stay for 2 days in a town. It's very exciting to me.
College students. We got a lot of students in college. My daughter's in college in Tampa, and she watches the live stream all the time. Easter, we were in Nashville. She came outside and said, "Daddy, come in, eat the service." I'm like, "Okay."
I love that.
Yeah. And,
I love that.
it keeps them connected, because there's so much other stuff that they could be doing on Sunday in college, which we don't
Like sleep. Well, and I would say for college ministry stuff. Bye, Jeremy. He's got to go lead the band. He's in the band. No big deal. College ministry is one of my. Remember I planted a church at UCF, and so it's one of my big passions. Again, I don't like college kids, but I like college ministry, and I think it's important that. Let me say it this way. Every summer, there were 2 of us, me and Laura. Laura would call every single church in Florida. So that's 130 churches. She called every single one, emailed every single one, right about now through the summer, and then through the summer. Tell us who are your graduates. A few kids from this church are going to UCF. It's the largest school in the country at this point. So we know just by base statistics, there's hundreds of Lutherans at that school, just by sheer numbers. Forget about the evangelism side, just babysitting Lutherans. She would get maybe 2 responses, maybe. Now I had the luxury of calling Jeremy directly and yelling at him and telling him to tell me what kids were coming up there. Now, yeah, is every kid going to connect with the Lutheran ministry up there? No, not necessarily, but it's a whole different thing when. From the moment that parents start bringing their kids to tour schools, they're meeting the local pastors, which I did. I actually met a few kids whose parents, they were coming, they contacted me through their pastor to say, "Hey, the Johnson family's coming up to tour UCF. Would you mind being on campus to meet their daughter and to tell them about the ministries?" Yeah, absolutely. It sounds so ridiculous. Because no one ever does this, and very few people do it, but it's exactly what should happen, right? It really should. That's why in the sermon, I talked about that next Sunday, looking at those kids and supporting them. It has to work this way. Our denomination, we failed because our model was what I said before. We raised kids up in the church and we kept the bubble, right? The bubble continued until they went to college. If they go to Lutheran school, maybe their school had a campus ministry, and then they would come back and get married. And they come back to church. Great. As it turns out, when that gap started growing, people went to different schools, and the schools that did have Lutheran ministry started to fade, or there's a whole other issue there. That gap started growing. And you can look at my graduating class, my confirmation class. I don't think anybody lives here anymore. Maybe one or two, maybe. So, and some of them, didn't get married for years. Obviously, I didn't. And so, if the plan was to take care of them when they came back to church and reconnect them to Jesus, well, when they're gone 10 years, they're out of the habit. Well, I don't need to go to church anymore. I'm still alive. I didn't get struck dead. So, whatever. I don't go to church anymore. I'll go once in a while when I visit home. How do we break that? Honestly, it's handing them off wherever they go out of college, when they graduate college, wherever they go after that, handing them off. They might not go to church. I may never have gone to First Lutheran in Gainesville. But one, the effort shown was important to me. And two, I always knew that Tim Hins was there for me if I needed him. Just like PT was whenever I needed to call him. It's important that we continue to do that. So next week, make that happen. And seriously, now that Jeremy's gone, you can hear this too. You tell him. Lift him up. He is a rock star, and I don't talk about him on the road because I don't want churches calling him. But there are very few DCEs that not only have the skills. Now, all the DCEs may have some of the skills he has, but is able to lead a global ministry here in partnership with now Henzi, but before PT and being that bridge, but still able to get on his hands and knees and be a dork with the kids. I had a call with him last week because I had to meet with a pastor or a DC last week and talking to him about how his role is going to evolve into more of a Jeremy Becker style role. So not just lift him up, but give him everything he needs and his family needs and other youth leaders need to make this the Rockstar Youth Group. I know I'm me because of the youth group. Yes, there are other things that led this in my Lutheran school, my family raising me in the church, etc. But the core of it, at least from my memory, was my work was me being embraced by the youth and work there. So do it, build a youth center, make it great and awesome, and let's pray because I'm going to make church late. Okay. Lord, bless the work of St. Paul, that it would continue in your name, that all people in Weston would not just know about this church, but would know who this church serves, your son Jesus. Lord, may we be people who joyfully live as your kids in the world. May our ministries expand digitally to connect people to you who can't be here physically, and that we'd be a church that embraces young people, raises them in the faith, and passes them off through your kingdom to other churches so that they live lives according to your will. Lord, guide us. It's the only way we can do this. For the sake of Jesus our Lord. Amen. Amen. Thanks, everybody.